This is the Texas Land Guys podcast, hosted by brothers Tim Dosch and Tom Dosch. With their partners David Marshall and Trip Rich, they have built DMRE, the leading land brokerage in Texas. With decades of experience brokering deals between landowners and real estate developers, they take you inside the deals that move the market.
Welcome to the Texas Land Guys podcast. Well, this morning I've got David Marshall in the Houston office with me. David, how you doing?
Good. Good morning, Tom. Thanks for having me on again.
It's good to have you on. I know we planned to have Tim on, but even though we're this many episodes in and season 2, our very expensive and nice microphone just decided not to work this morning in the Houston office. So
technical difficulties.
Typical. It's funny because we've been doing it now for over a year and we've recorded so many episodes, but something different can go wrong with hardware or software like every single time. So we're always have to be a little bit flexible.
Yeah, you know, the days of just plugging something into the wall and it working are over now. I can handle that. I can plug in a VCR or a DVD. Both of those dated me, but this is complicated stuff.
I was going to say, do you still have a VCR? Because those are once they break, it's pretty hard to replace those.
I do not have a VCR, but we still do have a DVD. And it was unplugged, sitting on a piece of furniture at our house. And I looked at my wife. I said, "Should we just throw this thing away?" But she said no. So we do still have DVDs laying around, but I can't remember the last time I watched one.
Yeah. I just remember in the early 2000s, it was like we would record all these movies that were on TV on VHS. And then we took like all the hundreds of VHS we had that had all this like recorded, footage. And then we put them all onto DVDs and you could do like the conversion. And then that lasted like a couple years. And then it was Blu-ray and then it went to streaming. But
my dad had a ton of like video footage from his camcorder on VCR that he recorded when we were growing up, like Christmas mornings, Thanksgiving, all the big holidays, some of our sports games and everything. And my brother was kind enough to take the time to transfer all that data onto the digitally. And so did that for my brother, sister, and I, and sent it out to us. And so we have all that home footage now on, digitally that we can watch on the computer. So that was really nice that he took the time to do that. But yeah, that's the way of the world now, right? I wonder what the next big thing would be in regards to that. It's not like the big camcorder, that Chevy Chase had in European Vacation.
Yeah, now the iPhones blow that away, which is crazy and it's tiny. But it is interesting. We weren't necessarily going to go there, but I was going to ask you just when you were first getting into the business, and Tim's talked a little bit about it, but he's talked about there were brokers at that point that had kind of pushed back against using email. Obviously, email had been around for a while, but it was still kind of new to the business. Do you remember technology having a big impact early on, or do you feel like it's more recent with like AI and some of the in the smartphone and things that happened kind of around the time you were getting into it a little after?
Yeah. So, I got my first cell phone, but it was one of the cell phones where you could text on it, but you were charged for, if you went over a certain number of texts. That was in 2000 is when I got my first cell phone. And then when I graduated college in 2002, I remember my first job, I got a BlackBerry. And so email right around then, call it 03, 04, started becoming, that was the way you communicated. Prior to call it 03, 04, not as much. I had my email account at school at Baylor, and then I had a Yahoo account, but it wasn't one of those things where you were checking on a daily basis, or now you're checking it every like 2 minutes, but it used to be where you might check it, on a daily basis or maybe every other day basis, but it wasn't like it is now. And then it's gradually, increased more and more and more. And now it's, a lot of times you communicate, we still communicate through email a ton, but a lot of it's text now. And then I know the younger generation, talking about my kids' generation, who are in like high school, it's Instagram and Snapchat and, they don't really text from my understanding the way, I think my generation and our generation text. I think it's a lot of Snapchat now. So that's changing as well.
Yeah, it's a little overwhelming, all the different platforms to try to figure out what you need to go check. So it's easier. Right. For me, I think text is easiest because if you're just really busy and you're in meetings or something and somebody needs to get a hold of you, it's just so much easier to check a lot of times than email because we get so many emails. But
you used to back in the day, you had X number of texts or it might've been you got charged for every text when it first started. Yeah. And then prior to that, I remember cell phones, you had a certain number of minutes. And when you went over that, you were charged additionally for each minute you went over. And if you were roaming, you didn't want to use your cell phone because you got charged because you were out of the network. So you used to watch your minutes pretty dang closely.
Yeah, a lot of that's improved a whole lot now with all the unlimited plans. And it shows the technology improving, like even just the cost of the cell phone plans has come way down from what it used to be. But the phones themselves are a whole lot more expensive than they used to be. But the technology is incredible. How much of our business would you say you do on your phone versus like on the laptop?
I'd say probably at least half.
Yeah. And even like obviously calling, but even like looking things up and sending an email and like kind of like working on your phone.
Yeah, I think sending an email, texting, calling, obviously. I try to look stuff up, but I feel like it's definitely when you try to look something up or pull something up, on the phone, you are kind of hamstrung a little, or at least I am. The screen's a lot smaller. You got to zoom in. So sometimes, unless it's necessary that I look something up immediately and get a response back, I usually wait to do that until I get back in front of my computer, so I'm not having to squint and really zoom in. And I still think the function, and maybe it's user error on my part, but I still think the function of like pulling something up and like moving around on your phone to look at a document, while it's good, it's still not like it is on your laptop or your desktop.
Yeah, well, for sure, the size of the screen impacts it. I mean, we've tried, and Brad's done a really good job just making all of our different applications like the Factor mobile friendly, and and the website mobile friendly. But it's still always going to be easiest to have a much larger screen that you can go to and use. But yeah, I mean, I think for today, I thought it'd be good to talk about relationships. And so thanks for coming on, and we can talk about that. We've talked a lot over the years. Ever since I've been working with you, I've been impressed that so many people know you. Obviously you, and I'll let you give a little bit more of your background just for our audience, but being in Houston for so long, going to school there, going to Baylor for college, and then coming back to Houston professionally, you've kept relationships all the way back to, all the way back to the beginning, I guess, probably elementary school and kind of before. And a lot of your friends and network are in the business now, and we've gotten to work with a lot of them. And the joke is that almost everybody that we meet, and it seems to be, it's not even just Houston, it'll be someone in Austin or Dallas. They're like, oh, I was a fraternity brother of David's, or, like three people removed, but like no David. And I never had somebody say anything bad about you. And I'm not saying you're perfect, because you'll be like, I'm not perfect, but
nothing bad yet.
Yeah, nothing. I thought it'd be good to have you on though, just to talk about how you've built that, because it's so important. It's so important in our business and life, really, because it's not just about projecting something that's not real. The goal is, as believers, being Christians, we're trying to honor the Lord in what we're doing, and we want to care about other people ultimately. And so having good relationships, that's what it is. But it's hard because our lives are really busy. You have a family. You have several daughters. Like you're very committed there. So I'd love to hear you share a little bit about that, because you're coaching and there's a lot of things you're doing. So there's just a lot of time. It's not like you're just going out with the boys every night, to hang out, or you don't have that type of margin to just go, play around at golf with somebody every day. So you're doing relationships in a way where it's fitting into your life, but you're showing people that you care, and you're handling yourself the right way. So I'd love for you to just share, we'll get into it, but I'd love for you to share about relationships and why that's important to you, maybe like where that comes from.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in Houston, lived here, essentially my entire life. I went off to Baylor for 4.5 years, graduated, and then came back. And so I was very blessed and fortunate, growing up. My dad was here my mom, our family was here in Houston, and he didn't have to move around and travel for his job. It wasn't a situation where, we worked he was in Houston and then the family had to move somewhere else. And so because of that, our family and my dad and mom, they were, able to establish roots. And that's something my dad's kind of passed along to me. And, that was really, really important to him. And I remember, as I became a young adult, graduated college and started in the business, my dad, told me, he's like, I think it's so important to have a community and to establish roots. And because of, our family, not having to bounce around and move around growing up, we were able to do that. And so that was, we were very fortunate and blessed because of that. But then also it's something that, I think you need to do. And if you really truly want to, or feel that way, you naturally just do that. You establish roots, and you form friendships and bonds and have these deep relationships. And so those obviously those relationships and how often you see, the individual who you have this friendship or relationship with, it's going to change over the course of your life because, as we all know, we have different stages in life. You have your childhood, then you've got your school years, then your college years, and then your young adult years, probably when you're single, and then you get married in the early marriage years, and then you start having kids. And then, as your kids grow up, you're spending a lot more time with them and, and raising them and, building them up and, teaching them. And so you will have these stages throughout the course of your life that, those relationships will change, but they don't have to go away. And so you might not have the time and the margin, like you talked about, Tom, where, hey, you can go out with your buddies, every Thursday or Friday night, or, go play a round of golf with your golf buddies, couple times a weekend. But you can still have those relationships and still stay in touch with them. And while you might not be able to play a round of golf every weekend, maybe it's every third month now, you can still stay in touch with them through text and calls and lunches and things like that. And that's the thing. It's just you got to be intentional about it, but also you got to want those relationships to stay intact. And if you don't want that, then they are going to kind of drift. And it's going to happen with some relationships, whether you like it or not, but just try to be intentional about it and, maintain those relationships. And I think at the end of the day, not to sound cheesy and corny, but it's got to come from inside and you got to want that.
Yeah, that's good. Well, when you talk about establishing roots, I think that it almost sounds kind of like old fashioned now because people don't really do that. And Tim and my story where our dad was in oil and gas. And so it's like the closest thing to being like a military kid where it's like you're moving constantly growing up. And so when I hear being able to establish roots and be in the same place and have friends that I had, that are still in the same town, and that sounds so incredible to me. It wasn't really a way that I was able to do growing up, but like you said, it's a choice now as an adult where wherever you are, and sometimes you can't control how long you're there, but you can still work to establish roots in a community. And, you can do that through finding a good church and just getting involved and meeting people or your neighborhood or whatever it is. But having those roots and following your dad's advice, it's pretty incredible just for our business and just for ultimately the relationships that you have, because I'm sure a lot of your friends that are still friends today have done the same thing. They still maybe live in the same neighborhood because do you live in the same neighborhood now that you did growing up or very close by?
Yeah, I live probably a mile away from where I grew up. We were there from the house I grew up in from 1981 when I was a year old all the way through 2000. well, I moved out, but my parents sold that house in 2007 or 8. So yeah, I could jog to my house that I grew up in.
That's pretty cool. I like how
and it wouldn't be a long jog. It'd be about a mile.
Yeah, just a warm up.
That's right.
I like how you dropped your birth year in there, just so the audience knows you're not yet 50. So
yeah, I might look 50, but I'm not. I'm 46 years old.
I do have to say, as an aside, when I first started, it was one of the first meetings I think I went to with you, or first 6 months. But do you remember that meeting we had over on Richmond, on the deal across from Costco and Greenway, where we met with the owners, and the guy was probably like really nice gentleman. He was like in his 80s. And do you remember what he said?
Yeah. He said, so at the time I was probably 30. When did you start working with us, Tom? What year was that?
22. So yeah, and you're like 10 years older. So yeah, you were like 32, 33.
Yeah, 32. And this gentleman that we were listing the property for, really nice guy. He was probably in his early 90s, but still really sharp and with it. Just a really, really genuine, sincere, nice man. And you do the math. His kids are probably 50 plus years old. If he's in he might not have been 90. He might have been in mid to late 80s, but you do the math, his kids are probably north of 50. And so we were on a phone, I was on a phone call with him, and, we're talking about work and the property and what's going on how we're marketing it. And then, we got done with that. And it was around Christmas time. I said, what are y'all going to do for Christmas? And he said, oh, my daughter and her husband and their kids, they're going to come in town. She's probably around your age. She's 55. And I said, oh, wow. I was like, well, I'm actually only 32. But and he said, oh, well, he's like, that wasn't a knock on you. It's just you come across very wise. So he recovered pretty quickly from that. But I thought that was funny. And that's a story I have not forgotten. So
yeah. Well, you do have that way about you where Tim and I've always appreciated the gray hair and the wisdom. So with us, with how young we've looked over the years, you can kind of add a little bit of that to the team. But yeah, I'll always remember that story. I thought that was so much fun. But yeah, back to just like you're growing up, and one thing that I would think would have had a really big impact on you, probably especially as you were really getting into your profession, was just your parents passing away, because I think for that, it probably gave you a real sense of how important relationships are, and like how important it is to take advantage of the time that we have with people, because we don't know how long we have with people. And that's how you've always treated me and how you've always treated others. Like it's very genuine. It's not, I'm asking how you're doing because really I want to ask you about something else, or I really want something else to happen. But was that I know that was an extremely hard time. So that had to have been really formative for you too, though, just like coming out of that and thinking about, this is the way I want to live my life.
Yeah, no, for sure. My relationships were super important to my dad, and he was a very social person, and he was always out and about, helping others. And it was funny at one point, he was the mayor of Bunker Hill Village. He was the president of the Houston Racquet Club. And then he was the business manager at Chapelwood, where we went to church. And he had this lady come up to him and said, "You're in charge of every single thing that we're members of." And, I thought that was funny. It just showed he did those things because he was trying to improve and make better those organizations. And, through that, he met a ton of people, but kind of sidetracked a little, but relationships were very important to him. I saw my dad, unfortunately, passed away when he was young. He was 62. And then my mom passed away about 10 years later when she was in her late 60s, 69. And, it's definitely too early. We had great parents though, and very thankful that we had wonderful parents who raised us right, took care of us. My brother took care of my brother, sister, and I. And, that's the most important thing. Of course, yes, I wish they were still around, and selfishly, I obviously still wish they were around, but I also really wish they were around to see them interact with my kids, which they're grandkids, and that would have been a special time and a special for my kids to experience and have my parents there for the ball games and the holidays and things like that. And I think it would have been something where my dad probably would have gone to every single sporting game that the kids had and would have been just as constant of a presence, there on the sidelines as me being there at the games and my wife Donna being at the games. So definitely, that would have been great to have that. But it's the way things go, and I'm very thankful for the time that we had with them. And a lot of people can't say they had wonderful parents, and I can say we had wonderful parents. So while it was shorter than I would have liked, we had a great mom and dad who raised us right and took care of us. So I'm very, very grateful and thankful for that.
Well, it's neat to see that I've really only known you kind of since around that happening. And so it's neat to see just the legacy that you're trying to have and the way that you live your life, because we're in a business where we talk about relationships a lot, but then at the end of the day, it's very transactional and can be very transactional. And one thing that I've started to appreciate the longer I've been in it is you're working with people over decades, the same people, and then you also start to see, you don't recognize it in the beginning, but then you start to see the way that people are behaving over time. There are people that it's like, hey, we can't do business with them. Unfortunately, it's like the way that they do business, we can't do business with them. And that's learned through the way that they've, performed on deals, or that maybe things they've done, or finding out that they're in 12 lawsuits or, whatever the issue is with that individual. And then on the flip side, what's always been really important to you, me and Tim, is how can our reputation as a company be very good, very positive, and way more than just about how many deals we do. Cause like that kind of comes along with it. Like if you do the right thing and treat people right, you'll stay in the business for a long time. You may miss out on some deals. There may be some deals we have to turn down, or we say we can't work on that or whatever, because we're being honest. But at the end of the day, I think we all believe there's going to be more long-term success just doing the right thing. And even if there wasn't, it's more important for us to do the right thing. And I appreciate that you have that background and foundation, and you've really led in that way, because there's been plenty of times where I'm like, gosh, I can't believe David just brought that up or thought that, he's thinking about the person. I was thinking about the deal, and so I really appreciate that. I always know you're going to be that kind of the governor on like, wait a second, guys, like, what are we thinking about, the reputation and the person here, not just about being successful on the deal.
Well, I appreciate that. You're painting me out to be an angel, which I'm definitely not, but, I think it's important, and to, take that a step further. I think instilling that attitude and that mentality into, the people within our company, because at some point we're going to be gone, and I still want, the company, as we all do, DMRE, to have that reputation as, hey, they're a really good, successful company that does things the right way, looking out for their clients. And I want that to go beyond. I mean, obviously while we're here, but I want it to go beyond when we move on, and, hopefully DMRE still doing what DMRE does. So I want that reputation to carry on for sure.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's with clients in the business to, talk about relationships, from the business perspective, and maybe not so much from a personal perspective, but, our clients, at first it starts off, it's a business relationship. But I think, what we see, as you do more and more business with these clients become friends. And so it's no longer strictly about business. It hopefully morphs over time and transition to where you have that personal relationship with them too. And so when you're going to lunch or breakfast or whatever, you maybe, you and your your spouse and your client's spouse to go out to dinner, you want those relationships to grow into kind of personal relationships where they're friendships beyond work. And so I know we have a handful of clients now. We go to breakfast or lunch or whatever it may be. And yeah, we talk about work and what's going on in their business and our business and how we can do work together. But I know, a lot of times it transitions into how are the kids? How's your wife? What are y'all doing this summer? Y'all going anywhere fun? And, there's that personal aspect to it that I think that's truly, where, I like for my business relationships to go to. It's forms a stronger bond, and a deeper relationship. And, there's that mutual trust that is formed there through that relationship. And, I think we do a really good job, not to pat ourselves on the back, but, we're looking out for our client's best interest. But as that relationship transitions and morphs, more into, or it adds that personal side to it as well, you're even more so going to be looking out for their best interest. So I think that's very important. And, it's we're in a business where I think that's where those business relationships, a lot of them should go. And I think it's definitely appreciated on both sides, from, our side and a client side as well, having that mutual trust and that mutual friendship from a business and a personal side.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's really interesting that in what we do, selling land, when we're representing developers, they tend to be, very experienced in the business. This is what they do for a living. And so, and a lot of them tend to maybe be more like around our age, or I'm realizing now a lot of the developers are a lot younger, just because the acquisition guys are a lot younger. So it's kind of weird. And I know you've felt that for a while. It's kind of weird when you're the young guy and then you're not anymore. But so it's been a lot of fun to build those relationships. And then on the landowner side, that's pretty incredible, because it really ties into where we started on more of the personal side. Because when a lot of landowners are, for sure, there are, the Goldman Sachs, Principal, Carlisle, groups that we represent recently, like big institutional landowners. But then there's also just these like mom and pop, you remember family that we work for in the Heights, that they had owned that manufacturing facility for like 60 years. And then, we worked with several families like that have owned properties for decades. And they really just naturally, what I've learned is this: they just naturally don't trust a lot of people in our position, because they're so used to like getting called and getting approached, and all the person really sees is dollar signs, because it's part of the business. It's like, if I could sell this, if I could lease this, I could make money. And so they kind of will get in there and talk to these families, and the families just don't know, because they talk to 10 different brokers and maybe 5 different developers, because everyone's trying to approach them, and they get all these different answers on what it's worth. And how definitive a lot of brokers and developers are on this is the best you'll ever get. And so with a lot of these families, we've walked with them for years, even before marketing a property. Like, to your point, having breakfast, having lunch, and really thinking about them as, what are they trying to accomplish? Is this even the right time? Like, is this a good time to sell? Because sometimes you're talking about like multi-generation, they're running a business. Is this good for the business? Or is this actually really a good time for the business, because the taxes they're paying, other options available in the market, like they really need to think about the next phase of their growth. And so that's so relational at the end of the day. And those decisions, that are being made by those landowners, we take a lot of responsibility in thinking through, are we the best person for that? Because we think about these landowners like our own parents. It's like, I wouldn't have wanted somebody to come kind of con my parents into hiring them for their first ever big deal, and they don't know what to do, and so if we're not qualified because it's just outside the box for some reason from what we do, then, we've shared that with landowners because we care. Like, we actually want them to get a good service. And also, like, it'll be a waste of our time. But I think that the relational aspect of some of the conversations we're involved with, because there are a lot of less sophisticated landowners, just because they don't do this for a living. Like, they don't know how it all works in the process, and they shouldn't, because they're not doing it every day. But that creates a lot of interesting opportunities for friendships too. Like, there was a gentleman in the Woodlands area that I became good friends with, and similar to the guy you talked about earlier, he was in his 90s. We were good friends until he passed away. And I got to help him and be a part of that transaction. And he had been approached by everybody from Howard Hughes to, everyone else over 45 years and just had never sold. And I just think that he saw in our company and in the way that we approached it, that we actually were thinking about him. His wife was in a wheelchair. Like, we actually really cared about him. It wasn't so much like, I'm going to force you to sell. It was more like, is this what you want to do? And if it is, we can help you. Yeah.
No, I think that's important. And those are great points you made. And, we do our best and try our best to stick to that, what you just said. And, I think a good way to do it is a lot of times, you look at it from their shoes. What would you want? Or what would you want for your parents? Like you said, Tom. And, a lot of times this is more than likely the single biggest, monetary event that's going to happen in their life. You're talking millions and sometimes tens of millions of dollars that, this property has been passed down from generation to generation. And they don't want to be the person in the family who sells it for way under value or messes something up or whatever. And that's where, hopefully we can come alongside and help or make sure that doesn't happen. So I think it's a combination of looking at it from their perspective, looking at it from being in their shoes, and then remembering, this just isn't another number, on a spreadsheet like it is for a business or, a big institutional type group. This is probably the single biggest monetary event that's going to happen maybe in generations of their families' lives. And so that makes it even that much more important. So, looking at it from those perspectives, I think is a good way to look at something as a broker. And, guiding them through that process is so important, like you said, because they don't know what the process is like. So many times they relate it to selling a home. And while there are a lot of similarities, they're completely different. And a lot more complicated. A lot more things can come up. And then on top of that, you're talking, like we said earlier, millions and sometimes tens of millions of dollars. So guiding them through that process, doing it, looking out for their best interest and having a sincere, genuine concern that, the result needs to be something that is positive for them.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We're talking about different things. Like there's establishing roots and building relationships over time, and then sometimes what happens with that is it's a good friend and they just refer, there's a referral that goes to someone else that's never met you. But since you have a mutual friend, you kind of get the benefit of like those roots that you established in that longstanding relationship. And then a lot of times with these landowners that we'll work with, there really isn't there could have been a referral, but a lot of times it's like they just are aware of us in the business and they want to talk to us because they know that we're out doing a lot of deals. But you have to build that trust really fast, which is hard because you can't really build trust really fast. But you're also, the reason it's so important for us is I'm thinking about the deals that I'm thinking about in my head that we're talking about, and none of them really went according to schedule. It's like you go to market. we had, they closed. Like there's two deals in the Heights that we represented, families that had long-standing multi-generational businesses there, and they both closed. But they needed amendments and extensions. There was environmental things that popped up, and so I think what's hard for a lot of landowners is they do think about it like a house, and they think when it goes under contract, you'll hear the terminology of like I sold it. Like it went under contract, it's like I sold it. And for us, we're like, no. It's like once it goes under contract, the real work begins to even know if there's anything there. Because we've had, 100 different things kill deals from like, there was a church under a site one time that nobody knew about from like 150 years ago. There was a Native American burial ground that nobody knew about. Like things come up that it's like nobody knows about these things. And it becomes, you can't develop on this property. So in those cases, though, when something comes up, there has to be that trust where they're like, so David, is this real? Is this legitimate? And we'll know from our experience if it is or not. And there's a lot of times where it's legitimate, and sometimes it's a market issue. It's hey, your property is a great property, but the market has adjusted because of interest rates or construction pricing, or maybe the closest rental comp. And now it's just they're not able to get it capitalized. So they need a little bit more time. I'm interested just when you're having those conversations with landowners, those are hard conversations because, for them, again, it's like the biggest sale in their life. And they're trying to figure out like, maybe they like you, but then they're like, but can I trust him? Because they just don't know. And they may chat GPT it and get a million different answers. So like when you're in those conversations, what do you try to do just to help guide them through the process?
Yeah. So it's tough, because I think a lot of these landowners, especially if it's, like you said, they have a one-off property or it's a family, they're not in the real estate business. I think they come in they come in to the situation a little guarded, and sometimes a lot of times, really guarded, but because they've heard the horror stories, right? And they've heard, like you mentioned earlier, Tom, they've heard 10 different things from 10 different groups. And so they don't know what to trust. So I totally understand why they come into the situation guarded. Because really, they've met everybody once or twice. There isn't really a relationship. There's the trust hasn't been formed. So they have all the right in the world to be very guarded. And I would be too if I was in their situation. So, I think what needs to be done is, number one, I think the biggest thing is, you need to communicate. And it needs to be over communicated. I'm not saying you're bugging them, but, as things come to surface, you need to let them know immediately, this is an issue, or this is not an issue. This is how we're going to work around it. Or this is an issue. These are our thoughts on how we're going to work through this and, get this property sold. So I think communication's a huge thing. And then, thinking outside the box on how we can solve for this, or, having contacts from being in the business saying, hey, there's some sort of access issue on the problem, or, easement or whatever, saying, let's talk to so-and-so civil engineer. They can help us work around this or work through this on, how to solve for this problem, which when we're out in the market, we can tell these buyers that, hey, this is an issue. This has come up on the property, but these are the ways we think it can get resolved. So they appreciate thinking outside the box. How are you going to problem solve? And then I also think, you as brokers, we need to be sensitive to the situation. And you don't need to just rush in there like a bull in a china shop. You need to be, understand that this is an emotional time in their life. This is a big transaction for them and their family, and be sensitive to that. We as brokers need to know when to put our foot on the pedal and when to maybe pull it off the pedal and maybe tap on the brakes some. And you just have to be able to read that and pick up on the signals that, a client is sharing with you. Sometimes clients, are, hey, back off, okay, totally get it. A lot of times, they're not that way. So you need to know when to pull back. So I think it's a combination of all that, and a lot of times it's just, you gotta pick up on these things, from a relationship standpoint, and notice them. And when you do notice them, know when to like pull back, or, or if it's an issue where, hey, we need to get this resolved quickly, in order to keep this deal intact, be able to tell them that as well. It might be something where they're kind of hesitant, but it's urgent. And that, hey, this is in their best interest that we get this solved quickly. So this buyer doesn't eat up too much time, and we can keep this thing on track as closely as possible to what the contract spells out.
Yeah, you mentioned communication. It's such a simple thing, but I've had a couple of deals recently where I've just been really frustrated because there wasn't good communication from the buyer, and it wasn't for a lack of trying. I was talking to the buyer and asking the questions, and really it was just not getting. I was getting the kind of the rose-colored glass answers of like, we're going to figure it out. It's not a big deal, right? And so then to find out that wasn't really the case, or to find out, I think we're always trying to get ahead of issues. And when no one likes day 89 on a contract to get the call that the deal doesn't work, the day before they have to go hard. And so there's just little things that you can do as a buyer and a broker to communicate we always tell our clients, like, if you know the deal doesn't work, as a buyer, you should let the seller know as soon as you can and terminate it. Because some developers will just keep it under contract because they don't really want someone else to pick it up. And that's so unfair to the landowner. And so even little things like that, just communicating, being truthful. The reality is waiting till the last minute, because some people's strategy is you wait till the last minute for your ask, thinking that if I wait till the very last minute, they'll kind of like have to give it to me. I haven't seen that work very often. And really, it just really breaks down trust because the seller realizes what's going on. And a lot of times the sellers just say no. Or if they say yes that time, the next time they won't, because they're going to start being prepared, for you to do that.
Yeah. I think communication's paramount, and not just in our business and every business and really every relationship too. If you don't communicate in a relationship, that relationship's going to break down at some point. And probably sooner rather than later.
What are some other things just within how you focus on relationships and how you're trying to always, like the reputation you want to have when you're whether that's, longstanding friends or even just clients, for them to know, like, when I work with David, this is what I get.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's communication, and he's doing the right thing, looking out for my best interest. A big thing I think is following through. I think so many people have a habit of saying, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do A, B, C, and D. They might do A and that's it. But if you say you're going to do something, following through and doing that. And I think that's something, not to knock our business, but it can be pretty common where there's a lot of talk, but not a lot of action, or saying they're going to do something and somebody doesn't follow through. And a lot of times it might not be intentional. It might be they get super busy and forget that, oh, I told so-and-so I was going to follow up on this for them, and they don't do it. And so I think following through is huge in our business, and not in any business, but in anything, and in a relationship as well. If you tell somebody you're going to do something, do it. If you do that enough over time, you're going to lose credibility. People aren't going to not trust you from like you're doing, but, oh, David, he says he's going to do that, but we know he's going to forget and not do it. So I think following through is very important. So if you got a client who's like, hey, I need you to check in on something for me, find out what a property sold for, and you tell them you're going to do it. Now, you might not be able to get it as quickly as they need it, but make sure it happens. Make sure you follow through and do it. And sometimes you might have to call them back and say, hey, I've been trying to get a hold of this person. I can't get them to respond to me. It might not be the answer they want, but, it's good to let them know that you've been working on it, trying to get them an answer, but, it might not have been on the timeline that they needed it.
Yeah, follow through is huge, because when someone doesn't follow through, you really do start to lose respect, because then you're like, I just can't really trust what they're telling me, and so there's no reason to say you'll do something if you're not going to do it. So I think that's, and the way we would look at that is, if a client ever asks us to do something, they're putting trust in us, giving us that opportunity. They could give it to someone else. That could be given to another broker, another firm, but they're giving it to us. And so we have to be able to execute on that.
A lot of times we might be asked to do something for a client that necessarily there's no really benefit to us out of the situation. But, it creates, that bond and that relationship grows stronger because of it, especially if you tell them you're going to do it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, another one that I was thinking about was just being genuine. And you can be genuine in different ways. You could be a genuinely not likable person, obviously, but I think one thing about you is that you've always been very genuine, and so you were always wanting to tell the truth and be honest. And sometimes that's not always what someone wants to hear, or sometimes it's not always the best way to promote yourself. So we've been in plenty of pitches together where you want to tell the client what they want to hear, but what's best for everybody to save a lot of heartache and pain is just to be honest. And so the honest answer may be like, several other brokers could have told you that your property was worth 10 million. We're very active in the market, and we know that in this case, it's going to be worth 8, or maybe it's higher, but in higher, they're going to love to hear that. So it's the lower one that's hard to share. But I think the genuineness is something that is really important to me, because one thing I've noticed is, and we talk a lot about it, we're just very, very adverse to like cheesiness and just the cliches that you'll hear that people will say in the business. And I think a lot of it is kind of like the fake it till you make it, and just be like, smile on my face, super positive, kind of like not who really anyone is. And so you just know, like, that's not really how this person is. The way that I've been on several calls even recently, and it's just something I think that's been more top of mind that I've noticed, where I've heard people talking in a way that's like not the way that we talk. Like before they make a statement, they have to say like 3 qualifiers before the statement. And you're just, like apologize 3 times. I've noticed it from several different brokerages, and I'm kind of wondering, like, somebody training this, but it's not genuine. And I just want to tell these young guys that I'm interacting with, these other firms, like, if you will just work hard and be who you are and just try to think about the other person, it's way more impactful than kind of like coming in like you know everything and really smooth, because it's just, that's not really believable. Like, you can see through that so easily. So I think being genuine is what people want. They want to work with someone where they feel like, I'm actually know who I'm working with. I'm not getting this facade that I really can't, necessarily trust, that I know what I'm getting.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's right. I mean, I think people who aren't being genuine and sincere, what they need to realize is people see through that. They're going to pick up on it. Maybe not on the initial meeting or whatever, but at some point they're going to pick up on that. And, I think just naturally, us as humans, we're drawn to sincerity. We're drawn to genuine people. That's what we want to be. And that's what we want from, the people we have relationships with. And I think, it's too bad that, I think, and not to say that, we haven't been, we're not always 100% genuine, but we definitely try our best to be. And I think it's something that just, if you are a good person, you're looking out for somebody, you're trying to work hard and do your best, that should come through, being sincere and genuine like that. But I think that's super important, because I think, maybe you might not know this, but people pick up on that. People pick up on somebody who's being fake and not genuine and not being themselves. And like you said, they might genuinely not be a nice person or genuinely not care, but at least they're being real and authentic, right? And you know what you're dealing with. So I think that's a great point you made, Tom.
But David, as we're kind of wrapping up, is there anything else related to relationships that kind of is top of mind that you would want to share to our audience before we close?
What we just touched on is a really good way to kind of maybe leave this conversation, is be genuine, be sincere. That's what you'd want from somebody coming to you trying to get your business or, sell you something, is you'd want them to be genuine. You'd want them to be sincere, and, not to come across cheesy or anything, but what's kind of the golden rule? Treat people the way you want to be treated, and it's pretty simple, right? And I think that's, and just, from a relationship standpoint, whether it's business or personal, stay in touch, communicate with people. You might go months or maybe even years without talking to a friend. I know me personally, I've got friends where I don't talk to them on a weekly or monthly and maybe sometimes yearly basis. But when I do get that text from them or text them, I appreciate it. It might be something as simple as, I haven't talked with somebody in a year. My birthday comes around. They remember to shoot me a text. You remember those kind of things. People remember those kind of things. So it doesn't have to be some huge production. It can be something simple as a text or a call, and leave them a voicemail. So not to sound old fashioned and I don't do this, but somebody writing letters, I don't think that happens very often anymore. And personally, I'm not a big letter writer or writing letters, but that people remember those kind of things. I remember when my dad passed away, I had a handful of friends who wrote letters, and I remember those people who wrote those letters. It meant a lot to me. And, especially this day and age when people don't, you don't see that as often as, back pre even our generation. So those are just a couple tidbits, little things that I think are important that I find, important in, people that I have relationships with.
Those are great, David. What I'm hearing is don't lose sight of the relationships and the people just for the deals and the transactions and how busy we get and, thinking about what's the next deal? How am I going to sell this property? But there's real people on the buyer and seller side that we want to have relationships with, for a long time. That's going to be a lot more fulfilling than just the business side of it. So thanks for coming on to talk about it. And this was fun. It was enjoyable. I know we had the technical difficulties. Tim would have added some great color, but we'll get Tim back on. We'll get that figured out. But thanks for joining, David.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah. Well, feel free to reach out to David or I, David at dmarie.com or Tom at dmarie.com. David's down in Houston. I'm here in Dallas. Also, follow the Texas Land Guys on LinkedIn. You can go to our website, dmarie.com, find our properties and get a lot of information there as well. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to our podcast today. If you have questions about land you own in Texas, send us an email at texaslandguys@dmre.com and follow us on LinkedIn to stay updated.